the whole book centers around the idea that there has been a deliberate cover-up of certain artifacts, skeletons, bones, not only in this century, but actually predating back into the 20th and to the latter part of the 19th century. And the reason for this is we have report after report after report, and we document those in the book about as settlers in the Americas begin to push into Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, all those areas, they see burial mounds, and they do these, conduct sort of these primitive archaeological digs in these burial mounds. Well, guess what? They're pulling out 9, 10, 11, even as tall as 12-footers, 6 fingers, double rows of teeth, reddish hair, copper ornaments. In my opinion, these are not Native Americans. They come from someplace else.
Now, why can't we go to the museums and see these marvelous large-scale skeletons?
Well, again, it comes down to this, that we are, academia and the scientific community runs under a Darwinian worldview, a Darwinian paradigm. Everything is filtered through Darwinism. And unfortunately, or I should say fortunately for us as Christians, these skeletons go against the Darwinian paradigm. It makes no sense. It means someone was over in this part of the world well in advance of the Bering Strait in the last ice age, what's called the Beringian evolution from people coming over on the Bering Land Strait into the Americas. It sort of blows that theory out of the water. It also is telltale in the sense that it's pointing to a race of people, or perhaps hybrid beings, which came from the old world. And the theory is as Joshua and Caleb pushed into the Promised Land, and we see all those different tribes,
right.
Nephilim tribes, Nephilim, Anakim, Rephaim, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, all these Nephilim tribes, and I believe each one perhaps had maybe a different physical characteristic. So as Joshua and Caleb come in to the Promised Land, what we see, in my opinion, is this diaspora. The giants realize, the Nephilim tribes realize, the mandate has gone out to wipe them all off. Men, women, children. And remember, these are demonic hybrid beings. They are Nephilim, where no grace and mercy is shown by the same loving God in the Old Testament that we serve today. No difference. The judgment is severe, it's final, and the giants see this, know this, and I believe some of them fled northward. Others built boats, perhaps, and sailed across the Atlantic. The ones that went northward, of course, settled down in the Ohio Valley, where we see what I believe is Nephilim architecture. And the artifacts that were exhumed in the latter part of the 19th and into the 20th century, again, we have, and it's documented in the book, we have report after report, newspaper clipping after newspaper clipping.
An idea of natural selection that it tends to develop an improved version of any species. You start out with a weaker version of a species, and through natural selection you end up with a stronger one. You apply that to humankind, and you infer that way back when, human beings were stooped over, kind of Neanderthal types, or they were smaller, they looked a little bit like apes, and over the years they got better and better and better and better until we are what we are today. And the only inference, L.A., that can come from that is that humans are getting better all the time, and the next generation of humans will be better than us. But that's not what the Bible says, as a matter of fact. The Bible really says almost the exact reverse.
And we go to a biblical passage where we see that our genetics are changed right around the Tower of Babel. We go from living 500 to 900 years. All of a sudden, our DNA somehow is changed, where we're brought down to about 120 years. Man shall live about 120 years. So we see that. And look, in my opinion, what's happening, or what has happened on the planet through thousands of years, has not been evolution. What we see as man is pretty much the same as he's always been, but we get these anomalies that are there, and when they surface, and when archaeologists or whoever discover these artifacts, they are immediately trucked away, hidden from sight. We actually saw this in Peru. We went to one museum. We were supposed to see a collection of very elongated skulls. And the entire wing, the entire room, I should say, which is a very large room, like 20 by 30, the entire exhibit was gone. And it had been gone for months. Everything was boarded up. And we asked the docent there, it's like, well, when is the exhibit going to come back? And there were no plans for the immediate future to actually have that.
Genesis 6:4. There were
exhibit
giants
brought
in
back.
the earth in those days and also after that. Now, we've talked about this before, and we've talked about the fact that these giants, the Nephilim, are not humans. If anything, they might be a human hybrid.
Right.
Ancient architecture of these creatures who were non-human, and I almost hesitate to say it, but I have to say it. They were non-human. They were other than human.
I agree.
And they
I
built remarkable, remarkable buildings that could not be duplicated today. Now, wait a minute. Not with all our engineering, our huge industrial equipment, our laser cutters. Couldn't do it today, right?
There were places that we saw, one in particular, Sacsayhuaman, where huge megalithic means very large stoneworks, huge megalithic structures were put in place. And when you're there and you actually look at these, and we have, by the way, there's like a centerfold of Sacsayhuaman in the book, full color. It's just an amazing place. When you're actually there, standing in front of the wall, it is just mind-blowing to think that a culture, let's say the Inca, who, archaeologists will tell us the Inca built this stuff, and there's just no way, in my opinion. The Inca, who didn't have the wheel, somehow transported blocks of stone, megalithic blocks of stone, weighing up to in an excess of 120 tons each, from 40 to 60 miles away, 2,000 feet below the 12,000-foot site level. Now, how does the culture do that? And not only that, when they got the stones there, they then began to shape them into polygonal shapes. There's not one stone which mimics another. It's like if you were building in modernity, you would have stones and you dress them all pretty much the same, make a nice tight little mortar fit. None of the stones are duplicates. None of the stones are jointed together with any type of mortar that we see. And yet these cuts, if there's a shape of a stone, let's say here's one angle and here's the top of the angle. This goes all the way through the stone. These angles go all the way through. They're not just dressed in the front and then they, kind of go off. They're perfectly constructed and they're polished surfaces. So these are not temples. These structures, we believe, were part of some sort of an ancient grid which literally covered the planet. Sacsayhuaman, for instance, I believe, is pre-flood. Just like the Giza Pyramid, pre-flood. Other structures are post-flood, and we indicate that in the book. But Sacsayhuaman was one of those places where you just stand there and you go, oh my gosh. There's really, Gary, there's two schools of thought here. And this is like sort of a rebuttal on the History Channel's, all due respect, Ancient Aliens program. It's either we're looking at ET technology, beings from other worlds which come here, which a History Channel has been promulgating, which of course we don't believe in, or this is Nephilim architecture. In other words, what we're seeing is the supernatural beings known as fallen angels manifesting openly on the planet. And because angels have different physical characteristics than we do and are able to manipulate time, space, and matter, as we see with Peter, when the angel comes in his jail cell, everyone is switched off, the chains fall off Peter, the door cell opens, the guards are all asleep, out he walks. The angel is manipulating time, space, and matter in ways that defy our physics. Well, I believe that these sites are what I would call Nephilim architecture, but trace back to the fallen ones.